Morning. Well, evening actually, but Sunday morning with me, John. And this is being done in the evening because I was down the pub watching the footy and also getting caught by the sun. As you can see, I've gone a bit red. It's been really warm here for the last few days. I spent all that time in Jamaica and went sort of brownish. I spent one day in the sun yesterday, and yes, I've gone red. Go figure that one. Anyway, while I was away, this became 30 years old. And what is this? Well, be no surprise to anyone to realise that this is my lovely Korg M1. Oh dear. There you go. So that is my M1. I actually own two of these. And the reason I own two of these is because I originally bought this one off a gentleman in Wales who listed it as broken, and I thought, well, I'll go down for a punt. So I bought it for about £150, I think it was at the time. Just over after I separated with my ex-partner, so you all know about that. Anyway, I went down to Wales. I picked it up from somewhere on the sort of west coast of Wales. So it was a sort of a weekend out. Went down to Wales, picked this up, and then I restored it to working health. And actually, all that was wrong with it, if I'm brutally honest, was that somebody at some point had changed the battery and didn't know how to restore the battery sounds. So, and it's never ever given me trouble ever since that. It is an absolutely super keyboard. Now, those of you who know me know that I also have in my stable a Korg T1, a Korg Kronos, and a Korg Oasis, which are broken. I'll come on to that in a minute. But the M1 turned 30, and I thought, because I was off air and I wasn't really recording things when it turned 30, I thought, well, now's the time to sort of like pick that up. So this was introduced in 1988 as a keyboard, and it was more than a keyboard. Everybody knows the M1 is much more than a synthesizer. It's a workstation. It has drum kits on it. It's got a sequencer on it. It is so much more than just a keyboard. And it was the first of that type or that lineage of keyboards, because Korg then went on with the Triton and the M3 and the Trinity, which actually I think it was the Trinity, no, it was the Triton that outsold this. This actually sold worldwide 250,000 units. Now, for a synthesizer, that is astronomical. And it was the biggest selling synthesizer in the world at the time. And then the Triton came along, and the Triton outclocked it. But that just says it outsold the DX7, it outsold the D50. So it was the biggest thing. And up until this thing came along in the 80s, the market was starting to change. It was starting to move from sort of the old analog synthesizers that when they get warm, when you used to get warm in a venue, you used to change octave range and change frequency and God knows all kinds of things. In other words, they were an utter nightmare to use live. They were a nightmare to use in the studio, as far as I understand it. And if I'm brutally honest, in that period of time, I was just yay high. I was a nipper. So you know, I've used analog synthesizers since, and I know how much of a pain they are, because you just get the thing tuned up, and then you know the room heats up or the room cools down or something happens and it goes out of tune. You have to then spend the next half an hour retuning the damn thing. It can be a real nightmare for some of this stuff. Anyway, along came the DX7, which was the first of the sort of the real sort of digital style synths that were affordable to the average musician. I mean, there had been other digital synthesizers before that, but this was the first synthesizer that was actually affordable to the musician on the street. I mean, I say affordable, I mean, it was still several £1,000s, and back then several £1,000s was quite a lot of money. I mean, it still is quite a lot of money, but back then it was really quite a lot of money. But the DX7 came along, and all the bands, all the musicians that you were used to seeing went and bought a DX7 and started using DX7s in their music. You know, it's just legendary. I mean, you listen to any pop song of that era, any rock song actually, because you know quite a few of the sort of prog rock guys were heavily into DX7s as well. You know, Emerson, Lake and Park, Keith Emerson, massive DX7 user for years and years and years. As was, you know, one of my favourites, which is ELP. No, not ELP. Yes. Oh God, what's his name? I'll come to me in a minute. God, that's bad, isn't it? Can't think of the guy's name. Anyway, that was the first one. The DX7 was then trumped by the D50 that came out in, what was it, 87? 87, wasn't it? D50. And that was phenomenal, the D50. You know, most notably was most of the Bad album was written on an early D50. All those bass lines and everything like that was all written on the D50 for that particular album. And as somebody once said, Enya made her entire career out of the sounds of a D50. I'm sure that's not true. She probably played lots of other instruments, but it's all the most notable ones, Orinoco Flow, etc., were all on that machine. And then along came this. And this just changed the game again. And I'm lucky enough in my studio to own a DX7 Mark II, which is one of the later models, a D50 and an M1. And they all have their places. They all have their sounds and they all have their places. And I probably would never sell any of them. For me, they all have their places in my studio. I use all of them, and I do mean I use all of them all the time for playing things. They have their strengths and weaknesses, and you probably would have seen me in another video that's going to go up on the channel if it's not already gone up on the channel, unboxing something called DT7, which is a programmer for the DX7. Which should allow me to unlock the DX7 a little bit more than I've been able to in the past. Now I can program FM. I understand the concepts of FM. It's just the interface on the DX7 is really laborious to program. You know, it's literally one parameter move. So hopefully I can, with the programmer, move through that sort of stuff quickly. I found that when I got the PG100 for the D50, being able to change sounds on the fly was really, really useful for me. So I'm hoping the DT7 is going to do the same. Anyway, along came this thing, and all of a sudden you were able to take complex sounds. You were able to layer those sounds across the keyboard. In fact, you were able to split the sounds across the keyboard as well. It's a little bit complicated to do, but it's easy enough to do, and it's perfectly easy to do. They supported it with initially 16 RAM cards, which was a combination of waveforms and data. So the waveforms went in the back of this thing and the data went in the top of this thing. And they made those for this particular model. Some of them were pretty naff, but most of them were actually they had some really classic stock sounds. The piano card is probably one of the sounds you'll hear over and over and over again on garage and house tunes, especially of the sort of late 80s, early 90s. That sort of dun 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 dun. That was this, right? Anyway, it became 30 years old, so this is now an antique, and it's still a working antique, and it still works all the time. And it was so much so that this, and you know, I said earlier in this video, I own a T1, and I bought the T1. Why did I buy the T1? I bought the T1 because it came up on eBay, and I put in a cheeky bid for it. Because it came up as not working, I thought it would be a nice project, and it actually was a nice project to restore the T1 to its full working. It also has a full 88 key keyboard, whereas this is only 61. Okay, so this is equivalent to the T3 when the T1, T2, and T3 were launched. So the T series was 88, which was fully weighted, 76 and 61, which were this synthesizer style keyboard. But anyway, diverting off the point, this was still in production when the T series was in production, and it carried on in production until when the T series was discontinued. So, you know, that's how popular and how many units of this were made. Now, if I roll this onto its side and I look down here, so my unit has 38117. So this was 38,000 of 250,000. So I would say this was a fairly early model. Definitely in the first couple of years this was made. So there you go. The M1 is 30 years old. But, and here's the rant. Even though this is 30 years old, this still works. It is still a very, very sought after instrument amongst people who know what they want to play. You could take this on the road, you could play it in a band, and you would not be out of fashion with the sound requirements of the band. Yes, it is now limited by the sort of the Cronoses, the Jupiter 80s, the workstations of now. It is rather limited. You can't get the same soundscape out of this. But I would have no issue taking that into a venue and playing it in an evening. In fact, I actually have done that in the last couple of years, of taking this into a venue and played it. Admittedly, I took the Kronos as well and had the Kronos underneath it, but I still took this with me and I played it. And the sounds that came off this were unique. They were lovely. But it's still 30 years old and it's still a fully serviceable piece of keyboard tech. My issue as always with these things is that a lot of the programs that were made to support this were written on old Apple PCs, old Windows PCs. And the world has moved on. We are now, I mean, if you're using the latest Apple, I mean, was it High Sierra now on Apple, and Windows 10 on my Windows PCs. Which means that a lot of these programs that were designed to support these things have long since ceased operation. And what I'd love to see is somebody who may be the original author of the particular piece of software, or you know, if the software was made by the Korg Corporation or the Yamaha Corporation or the Roland Corporation, someone there to actually take that piece of software and port it to the latest versions of the operating system. Because if you do that, not only will you keep these legacies alive, you'll be able to sell it. It's a miracle that people will still buy it. You might not be able to sell it for $300 or $400 like you did the first time round, but believe you me, you might be able to sell it for $50 or $30. And a lot of people out there, I mean, they will say these things, 250,000 of these were made. Okay, that means let's allow for attrition of half that. There is still 125,000 of these in serviceable use, probably, right? That's 125,000 people who will buy your software at $30 a pop. All right. Doesn't take a genius to work out you can make some money. All right, it's not big bucks by corporation standpoint, but somebody can make money for, I would say, probably not a lot of effort if you know what you're doing. Now, I'm not a software developer, but I work with software developers all the time, and I know that they can make money for old rope by just porting software from one platform to another. So my appeal is that if you made software for one of these legacy synths years ago, so software for library management on an M1, a T1, etc., a DX7, a Roland D50, a D10, a D5, whatever it happened to be, dust it off, load it into a PC, get the source code, and update it to run on Windows 7, Windows 10, the latest Mac OS, because we will come and we will buy it. It's as simple as that. I just find it a shame that people are letting that sort of thing go when there is still a massive market for this out there. I mean, I had a rant the other week about the JP80 and the iPad software being dropped by Roland. There's nothing wrong with the keyboard. The keyboard is absolutely superb. It's probably one of the finest keyboards, one of the finest synthesizer keyboards Roland have ever made. And yet they've now dropped support for the iPad app. It's been removed from the App Store. Purely because you have stopped selling the keyboard does not mean people are not going to buy the software to go with it. You know, that is a very, very, very short-sighted view. Anyway, Korg M1, 30 years old. See you next time. So this is the point in the video where I turn around to you and say, if you enjoyed the contents of this video, please give it a thumbs up. It allows other people to find this content more easily that you have enjoyed. I'm sure by now, if you didn't like the content of the video, you've probably given me a thumbs down, but I'd prefer if you didn't. If you'd like to be notified about when I post additional content to this channel, somewhere about here should be the subscription icon. So please click on there and subscribe to the channel. Over here should be other content that you may enjoy that I've already done or posted to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again.